Hi, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Bharatvaarta podcast. This is a preview of the Goa Assembly elections that are scheduled to be held on February 14th. And to discuss that with us, we have our non-resident Goan expert and non-resident Goan, Nimish Joshi. Welcome, Nimish, to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thanks, Rohit. It's great to have this conversation with you on Goa. Would also be looking forward to getting your unique views on the upcoming Goa elections.
So, Nimish, it surely looks like it's going to be a promising conversation. So, without further ado, let's get into the meat of things. So, of course, this year was, the last year was the 60th anniversary of Goa's liberation, and there was a huge celebration, etc., that was held by both the center and the state governments. So, do you want to use that as a backdrop to sort of give our listeners a broader overview of how politics in Goa has developed since its liberation? Because, of course, its history means that its politics has developed in a different way to the rest of most of India.
Yeah, I think definitely, Rohit. I feel 60 years, I would like to lay down a few key points. One, of course, very interesting that over the last 60 odd years, I would say there are three key phases of the over the last 60 years, from the liberation till up till say 1984, I would say, where the MGP was dominant. Then from 1984 to 2002, up to 2002, when the Congress was pretty much the dominant party. And from 2002 onwards, I would say obviously BJP and Congress have both have that had their share, but BJP has been probably definitely the most dominant party in Goa politics. So these are the three distinct phases. So maybe I'll that few key themes. One, across all these 60 years, one of the most important one has been Goa has been always a bipolar polity. So whether it was MGP and the Congress earlier, and then BJP and the Congress. So that's been always the case. A bunch of regional parties have come there flattered to deceive. They would have been offshoots of one of the national parties, some people coming up, but somehow no one seems to have ever got the requisite standing or have been able to cross a threshold to consider themselves a contender. And in this election also, you are seeing a number of parties like AAP has been around for some time, TMC trying to make an entry, GFP, which was there, the Goa Forward Party. But I would say by far, at least until this year, it's been a bipolar election. And surprisingly, despite being a bipolar, in the last 35, 40 years, only twice, only in two elections, have parties got absolute majority. So, which is pretty strange. And that despite being a bipolar thing, only twice. It was 1999 when Congress got it, and 2012 when BJP got a majority, absolute majority. Otherwise, last 40, 45 years, it's always been a coalition government. And with that coalition has also come its share of instabilities, and most prevalent in 90s and 2000s, I would say. That has and maybe more recently, when a bunch of Congress MLAs just decided they wanted to be in BJP one day. But this Ayaram Gayaram that you talk about, poaching, and despite the anti-defection law, super prevalent in Goa and continues to be, though it seems to have reduced significantly in other parts of the country. Goa continues to see that kind of form of politics, good or bad, but that's the thing. So I think that's there. So MGP versus Congress up till 99 onwards, BJP versus Congress, and this time around, I would say BJP has firmly dislodged Congress as the one pole, and maybe Congress is struggling to be the second pole of politics right now. So I think that's the broad overall party wise. I think the other broad issue has been the community, religion. I wouldn't say fault lines, but a lot of politics has been played in Goa. I think maybe barring the northeast, Goa has the highest, as a state, has the highest proportion of Christians, maybe 25-27%. And that has definitely played out as one of the key factors. And increasingly, anti-BJPism in the state has been defined along religious lines a bit, with the Christian community supporting, or anyone wanting to take an anti-BJP stance automatically gravitating towards a core set of either Christian leaders, Christian electorate, or Christian issues. I think that's one thing which has played out. And finally,
I just wanted to come
yeah,
in there. Now, if you remember in the heady days of 2010, 11, and all, when it was very clear that Manohar Parrikar was going to come to power as and when elections were held on what you could say was a surge of optimism, etc. At that time, there was this general feeling, at least outside Goa, that he was also actively getting Christian support and things like that. Now, was that ever true? And two, if it was true, why do you think that is that's clearly not the case anymore in 2021?
I think probably there could have been some green shoots. I mean, even if you look at, if you see the constitution of BJP's elected representatives has changed, right? I mean, out of the 13 odd MLAs in 2017, I think 6 or 7 were from the Christian community. Out of the 26, 27 which BJP had in the outgoing assembly, 50% are Christians. So that way, yes, BJP has been much more welcoming. I think 2012 was an exception because there was a lot of anti-incumbency against the existing Congress government of Mr. Digambar Kamath. And even then, even despite that, if you see in the core, what Salsett Taluka, as they say, that's the ground zero of Christian politics. Even in out of there are 8 seats, there are 4 or 5 which are very Christian dominant. Non-Christians probably have never won it. BJP didn't win any of those seats. Instead, they supported independents who won those. So clearly, even in that, when you say heady optimism and peak of support, the lotus symbol was a strict no-no for the community even back then. So I think those extrapolations might not be appropriate. So I think, and if at all, 2017 and 2022, it's pretty clear that even those levels of support, despite having such high representation, no longer exists. That's been, I would say, the broad thing. If you ask me, one probably angle is the caste. I mean, like every state or there is caste politics, but much less so, I would say, in Goa. And it would be reflected in a way. See, the Bhandari community is a dominant community in Goa. Maybe I would say third of Goa's population are the Bhandari community. And for the first many years, their great leader Dayanand Bandodkar, who was the leader of Goa. But since then, and his Maharashtravadi Gomantak party represented the interests of the Bahujan Samaj. I think after that, since last 40 odd years, 45 years, we have had only one Bhandari community leader, that too Lakshmikant Parsekar, when Mr. Parrikar went for, opted to be the defense minister. Barring that, you haven't seen any Bhandari community leader. So there is this churn, I would say, and you would see AAP trying to raise that issue, promising or a Bhandari community chief minister. So some of those caste-related cauldrons have also opened up. The GSB community, which is maybe 3-4%, has been in fact pretty dominant, and Mr. Parrikar comes from that community. So there are certain, I would say, dormant caste formations which probably a bunch of parties are trying to open up this time around. It hasn't really played out in any significant way over the last 40-45 years. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out over the next few years. But yeah, so that's a quick, I would say, 40-year overview of how Goan politics has been. I mean, characterized by mass defections, bipolar polity, some form of I wouldn't say, but some Hindu Christian polarization in parts, and largely absence of caste politics to the extent we see in rest of the country, and the dominant community probably never getting a chief minister, not getting a chief minister in the last 40-45 years.
It's an interesting point, right? Because if you look at how politics everywhere else has evolved, you have seen more representation going to, the so-called Bahujan communities or numerically dominant communities in state after state. I mean, that was what primarily Mandal was about, right? And even BJP's reactions to that in so many states. In in that context, how do you see Goa as having gone, you could even say, in the opposite direction, right? Because the immediate aftermath of liberation was, as you mentioned, marked by a very assertive politics by the Bahujan community, which has sort of sputtered out, while the rest of India literally went in the opposite direction. Why do you think? Do you have any views on why this has happened?
I think maybe lack of credible leadership is would be my thing. So what happened was, after Dhyanand Bandodkar, his daughter Shashikala Kakodkar, and then Ramakant Khalap, they tried to take over the leadership. But I think Goan politicians tend to do a lot of deals for small gains, probably. So moment you start, I think Ramakant Club also ended up moving to Congress, and he contested some election on Congress ticket as well. And you would recall Khalap was, I think, the law and justice minister in the Devegowda government in 1996. Unlike so 1990 was definitely this, but rest elsewhere that thing happened in terms of Bahujan assertion and politics. But I guess in Goa there was no proper leadership to really channelize that into a movement, or take electoral advantage of that. And maybe every time MGP used to get, so I think 1989 probably was 20 Congress seats, 18 MGP. MGP always fell short, and Congress under Pratap Singh Rane, and then there was a host of chief ministers, they managed to break open the independents and get their support. So I think it never really went. And by that time, I think 96, 98 onwards, BJP had become pretty dominant. So because of that, and Parrikar offered that credible leadership across castes, across, I wouldn't say communities, but definitely across all castes. So which is why I think that generation that totally skipped, and he became the de facto leader of Goa, and that OBC assertion sort of just skipped. That, I think that's my view. I mean, I don't know whether you see similar parallels anywhere else in the country. Something similar happen. Maybe smaller states sometimes tend to work a bit differently.
I think coming to think of it, you can even say that, Goa just moved from caste. It was just ahead of its time in having some sort of a caste-based assertion, but then moved along quickly enough on the Hindutva plank. And one thing you've seen in Hindutva politics, at least, is that everywhere in India, the initial leadership at least has come from, upper caste communities before that again changes. And maybe that's something that you will see in Goa over a period of time also, at least from the BJP's perspective, because all said and done, the largest number of Hindus in Goa still do vote for the BJP.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, in fact, in a way, if you were to look, the current set of leadership has, at least the ministers and MLAs, that has completely changed. I mean, after Mr. Parrikar, in fact, all the upper caste MLAs and all are mostly are from the non-BJP parties, whereas BJP is, I would say, middle caste or this. So that constitution has changed a bit. Definitely, no doubt about it. So we'll have to see whether that translates into firm leadership and hence following. And because you see, it's quite funny. I mean, the MGP, which is the Maharashtra Gomantak party, which was a party of the Bahujans, 2099, 2000 onwards, it's being helmed by two Brahmins, or Bhatts as they call in Goa, the Dhavlikars, and maybe no Bahujan Samaj in any which way. Even the probably three MLAs they had in 2017, two were Brahmins or Bhatts, and one was a Bhandari, Mr. Asgaonkar. So I think, or other SC, not even Bhandari. So I think, yeah, it's quite different. I mean, the leadership, but BJP is probably definitely moving more towards a more middle caste, lower caste leadership in Goa.
I think that brings us to our next question, because we've been touching on how things have been changing over the last 5 years. Do you want to just give a brief overview of how all the like how the political landscape in Goa is placed as we enter the elections? I think it would take some amount of time just to explain what exactly happened in that chessboard over the last 5 years. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think you can give a shot at that.
Yeah, so I think before I go, I think I'll just give overview of what it looks like the setup, and then go explain what's happened over the last 5 years. My view is clearly there's tremendous anti-incumbency against the government by Chief Minister Dr. Pramod Sawant, and it's the government has BJP has been in power for 10 years. There is a big yearning for change, and so I think that is something very real, and I'm sure it's not escaped anyone. But at the same time, there's absolutely no credible opposition to channelize all that anger and yearning for change into votes. And you see, what's happened is so there is no credible opposition. Congress, which was the other pole, and which is why I'm saying it's been a bipolar polity for the last 60 years. Congress, which was supposedly the other pole, has disintegrated, and that's where brings us to the last 5 years. What's happened is in the 2017 Goa result was a bit like 2017 Gujarat. In a way, there was again a lot of anti-incumbency against then Lakshmikant Parsekar government. And in fact, Congress did turn out to be the single largest party with 17 seats. They missed, but somehow it's another story that BJP managed to form the government with support of other parties. But that was, I think, Congress's moment, and that moment is gone. Of those 17 MLAs, only one MLA is now contesting on a Congress ticket. Imagine 16 have left the Congress over, they quit, like Mr. Pratap Singh Rane is retired, other 15 just moved. That's where I say, now imagine such big anti-incumbency, such yearning for change, and no one else wants to contest on a Congress ticket. No credible person. So that just shows there is no way the Congress is channelizing this anger in terms of votes towards itself. And it's logical, right? If 13, 14 of your MLAs who are elected on Congress ticket have moved to the BJP, it becomes very difficult to convince the electorate to go say, you vote for us and we will are anti-BJP, because the natural question will be, what if your MLAs move, which is what's been happening. So I think that's one thing. But this, while BJP managed to stay in power over the last 5 years, when you do these kind of deals, when you import 10 MLAs, you give, or you import 2 out of the 3 MLAs from MGP, it does impact governance. And that is something which has led to anti-incumbency. It's been quite a poor government by most yardsticks, I would say. A lot of corruption, lot of uncompleted works, and COVID also hit the state economy hard because of tourism is the single biggest this. So it impacts a large section of people. I was traveling in Goa in December, and mining ban has been around for quite some time. There are 3-4 mining seats out of this, which has impacted. So yes, inflation, mining ban, tourism hit due to COVID, misgovernance. I think it's a heady cocktail for any government to run into. But surprisingly, despite that, the BJP seems to be in contention. And I mean, had it been any significant opposition, I think by now people would have just packed their bags and left. But there is still hope for the BJP despite this setup. And I mean, you've been hearing about the high profile entry of TMC, AAP doing work in the uh, state for last many years. And then there's a smattering of parties, the recent one being the revolutionary Goans, who I mean, by their very name, they are half communist, as they for. So everyone is having some impact, but somehow as a whole, none of the parties has been able, I think, able to cross a certain threshold enough to make a big dent on its own on BJP or channelize the entire anti-incumbency vote towards itself. I think that's probably, in a nutshell, the way I would say how the macro setup is.
Let's come to the BJP, right? I mean, BJP is going into these elections without the presence of Manohar Parrikar, who literally, you could say sort of was the dominant force since the party becoming relevant in Goa. Even after the last election, after the BJP lacked the numbers, the other parties insisted on bringing him from Delhi, making him resign the defense ministership to become, insisted on him being the CM. Of course, he unfortunately passed away. So, how big a challenge do you think is it for the BJP that they are actually facing? And you can't say it's the first time because technically last time also they didn't fight under his leadership, but at least he was there and around, and he was used as the backstop, of course. But this is the first time where he's definitively not around. So, how big a challenge do you think is that for the BJP, and do you think the party is able to sort of handle that?
See, I think definitely Manohar Parrikar was a larger than life, say, politician, person. And as I told you, under his leadership, as you yourself sort of well summarized it, Goa directly transitioned from to a Hindutva politics and totally over moving over caste politics, and it only due to his effective leadership that happened. So definitely, I think it's a hit, and there's absolutely no doubt about that. Its impact, and that is compounded by the fact by sort of the general misgovernance perception and a slight demotivation in the cadre. So I think it's it's a tough situation, but I think what tends to happen is why does BJP still have hope? Because two things. One is, firstly, I mean, to win a seat in Goa, you need 8 to 10,000 votes, and that's not a lot. So it sometimes the local satraps who have a lot of local influence, they are able to move beyond anti-incumbency and due to their personal hold, because it's a question of 8 to 10,000 votes, and a number of them, and most of them used to be in Congress, and in the last 5 years, a number of them have been imported by the BJP. Anti-incumbency or no, I think those 4, 5, 6 seats is something BJP gets straight away because of their sheer presence. And even at peak of Manohar Parrikar's power, the satraps retained their seats on Congress tickets. So definitely that's one factor. Second factor is, if you see, right, I mean, what's happened is BJP has settled in that 30 to 35% vote share range. It has become the dominant pole of politics, and it has settled there. The peak vote share was 35.5%. But of course, they fought less number of seats in 2012. But maybe if you were to aggregate a 37, 38, but roughly 30 to 35 is the range. Now, and it's probably the only party with a pan Goa presence. So there is some cadre build up, the charisma of the Prime Minister Modi, add to that some Hindutva tinge, and some local MLAs, because pretty much every strong local MLA, satrap, experienced politician is in BJP, pretty much. So you get that advantage which the BJP has. So maybe another 6, 7 seats can just be added basis that. So I feel that forms the floor for BJP in terms of number of seats. So 13 to 14. So now how they really cross the bridge from 14, 15 to 20, 21 is the key issue. And that's where all these factors I spoke about in terms of anti-incumbency, how are they able to counter it, the mining ban, tourism ban, what our people are facing, or if any opposition gets suddenly aggressive, starts getting some traction. I think these are still unknowns. Tickets are yet to be out. there are some alliances which are being talked about, like TMC and Congress openly hobnobbing, or maybe whatever. So I think some of those things will play out and they will impact this. But my overall thing is, despite everything that I have said, I think BJP is in pole position to be the number one party with 14 to 15 seats. And what Congress had through 90s and 2000s, that regardless of whatever governance changes, there was a certain vote share plus satraps all put together. That's something which is working for the BJP. So just to say, I mean, you look at the two Ranes, Vishwajit Rane, Pratap Singh Rane, they've been winning their seats forever. They're in BJP. You have Pandurang Madkekar from Kumbharzua who's been winning his seats across. He's won on a MGP ticket, on a Congress ticket, on a BJP ticket. They are there. There are a bunch of other leaders who have been sort of winning. And so I think that's the biggest advantage. And someone like a Congress, they don't have any presence in half the seats now. When your main opposition party is probably fighting just 50% of the seats realistically, so you can see the scale of difference, or the which both parties are approaching the election with.
That brings us to the good question of, what do you think is the Congress's prospects as at least the leading opposition party till very recently. They also have sort of got into an alliance with the Goa Forward Party. So maybe you can shed some light on both the alliance as well as the individual constituents.
Yeah.
And
So I think,
what exactly does Goa Forward stand for?
see, actually, Goa Forward, before I go into Congress prospects, I think Goa Forward itself is like an offshoot of the Congress. There's a gentleman called Vijay Sardesai who was denied the ticket by Congress in 2012. He went on to contest the elections from the Fatwada constituency and won. And then from 2012 to 2017, he was the dominant opposition voice, opposing BJP, which is why he got his popularity. And then in 2017, two former, they won, Goa Forward won 3 seats, with Vijay, including Vijay himself. Again, the other 2 seats were ex-Congress youth leaders in Saligaon and Shiolem constituency. And then he went and joined hands with BJP. So clearly his credibility took a significant hit because his whole plank was anti-BJPism, and he was saying Congress is in cahoots with BJP. So, and today, if you realistically ask me, if there is no alliance with Congress, he will struggle to retain his own seat. So a person who was like high opposing BJP is probably today struggling to retain his own seat without the Congress. So I would say the Goa Forward is irrelevant in the Goan politics, barring that 1 seat anymore. It's just maybe a technical alliance, but doesn't really help the Congress much. So that's what it is. Congress, on the other hand, I think, see, it's in a structural decline, like in probably many parts of the country. So, while it did end up being the single largest party with 17 seats in 2017, its vote share probably was the lowest in the last 45 years. And a similar vote share they had in 1977 after the emergency. So you can imagine, of course, the constituents of Goa was slightly different with Daman and Diu and all included then, but just trend-wise, they had roughly, I think, 28.5% vote share. More importantly, they had higher vote share in 2012, incidentally, than in 2017 when they were literally wiped out. So you can imagine the opposition is getting more splintered, right? That's the reflection. And most importantly, they were first or second in only 23 seats out of 40 in 2017. So out of which they won 70. And before 2017, that number used to be 30, 35. So that's a reflection of whether if you're not even in the top 2 in the seat, then that shows how strong you are, right? And imagine from that 23, pretty much 17, 18 people have moved out. And that takes, so which is why I feel it's a structural decline. And even with the alliance, which I don't think is of any significance, the GFP alliance, my sense, it will only help the GFP win 1 seat, Fatawada, that's it. I don't think it's helping Congress in any which way. My belief is Congress is probably vote share, maybe it could be early 20s, mid 20s at best. And that too, in certain pockets, is where that vote share will be concentrated. So they really need to need some surgery in this. I know Mr. Michael Lobo going and lot of noise. Probably Michael Lobo's moving to Congress has generated more noise than Swami Prasad Maurya in UP. But the reality is, maybe even at their peak, I don't think any leader had beyond besides Manohar Parrikar could influence more than one seat his own, at most one seat in neighboring. So it's a lot of hype being generated around that. I think it's a party in structural decline, needs urgent surgery. I don't think, uh, and it's now firmly under the in fact, its entire Christian leadership has moved, or the so-called leaders. Luisan Falero himself, a multi-term MP, Churchill Alemao has been in and out, Alexo Reginaldo Lorenco. Again, I think a lot of they have moved to TMC. So imagine these are sure shot people. They could have won their seat, or at least big leaders. Even they don't want to contest on Congress's ticket. And if you, they have declared only 14 seats. I mean, of which 14, if you look at the list, it will give you an idea that absolutely no bench. Probably people just don't want the Congress ticket, any credible person. I think, which is why I'm saying they are not in a position to channelize that anger against the BJP government to translate into votes for themselves. And especially multiple claimants have come up for the Christian vote, which used to vote for Congress. And I think it will still they'll still end up voting for Congress, but at least AAP has been making inroads and getting some traction. TMC, of course, through importing some of the satraps. So I think I would be surprised if Congress crosses double digits in terms of a number of seats. Crosses single digits, rather.
You raised an interesting point there about how Congress, even in 2017, they were there only in 23 seats. Now, if you look at 2017, I think one interesting thing, at least I saw when I was looking at the numbers, was the heavy amount of bipolarity, right? And when I say bipolarity, it was like in seat after seat, voters sort of knew that, who was the best placed anti-BJP candidate, and they went hard for that person. So wherever, BJP won it, like it won its core seats, right? Like you could see those large vote shares. There were maybe a couple of seats, I think Vasco and Kottalim or something, where, BJP people won on very narrow vote shares. But
I think
otherwise,
Marmugao and Kortalim pretty much. And yeah.
Mamogao, while the margin was small, the vote share was very high. Like the two guys both got
Fairly bipolar.
48%. Yeah, so it was like
Yeah.
there was no vote split per se.
Mhm.
So I think that shows that even in 2017 there was a lot of anti-incumbency, and there was a lot of tactical voting by anti-BJP people to get the BJP out. But somehow the people they voted for completely let them down, right?
So I
That
think,
might
yeah. So I think if you see, right, I mean, that's right. And secondly, wherever Congress, I mean, look at Saligaon, there is GFP had no business winning Goa forward, or Sholim, Goa forward had no business winning. So imagine extreme anger in against existing MLAs, and even then they preferred a non-Congress candidate. So, and I would say that's the peak of peak of Congress. I think it would be very difficult for them to match that seat performance after that. Sorry, you were saying something. I cut you out.
No. So what I was trying to build that forward was for our next topic, which is on how AAP is, how AAP may do in Goa. Because as you mentioned, AAP's been hovering around Goa for a while. Like Kejriwal, I think, had the foresight immediately after he won Delhi in 2015 itself to pick on Goa as a small state, where, as you said, you need only 10,000 votes, etc., as a good, number two state. Of course, then it got distracted by Punjab. The 2017 elections were a bit of a washout for AAP. But they've suddenly managed to come back. No, I wouldn't say suddenly, but ever since the Lok Sabha elections, they've put in a lot of effort. They've managed to come back into the narrative, at least. And if you look at, the polls, etc., some of them are even saying that AAP will poll better than Congress. And, so how do you think that's going to work out? Because it's very difficult to, at least from past data, understand what AAP will do, because they're a blank slate, so as to speak.
Yeah. So I think definitely, I mean, it has made, and there's no doubt that AAP has got some resonance in Goa, absolutely no doubt. And you can see it in opinion polls. Though I must admit, where some people are giving as high as I think early to mid 20s vote share to AAP in those polls. I feel that might be a bit overstated. Uh, but definitely, if you were to look, see the seats like Benolim, Navelim, these are like the heart of Christian politics. And AAP definitely seems to be like a front runner there. And they have one imported candidate from the Congress, one like it's like a merchant navy guy, and definitely then their Hindu face or whatever, I think Bhandari face, Amit Palekar from Santa Cruz, definitely in contention. So if you ask me, 4 5 seats up has a realistic chance. Now if you were to say Santa Cruz, Navelim, Benolim, maybe one or two, but if you look at this trend, these are seats which probably BJP has never won. So you can imagine what exactly is happening. So it's the probably at least a majority of this is anti-BJP vote, probably voting for the Congress, voting for AAP, or likely will vote for AAP, at least given the delta. So I think that's one trend which I mean sort of correlates with what I was talking earlier in terms of the anti-BJP vote shifting, and these parties getting resonance in seats where BJP was anyways weak, maybe would have never won it. So that's why it might not hurt. But yeah, 4 5 seats I think are probably 3 2 3 definitely. Up to 4 5 things go right and all that. I think this, and Kejriwal has been smart, right? Yesterday he said that I'm willing to support any non-BJP alliance. I think that's also a reflection of maybe some signaling to Christians, because his realistic chances are in the Christian heartland, or seats where Christians are quite dominant, or mostly given Christian MLAs. So I think that's the one theme for AAP. But at the same time, I would also like to say that AAP, this 20-25% pan Goa vote share might be overstated, simply because some of this anti-incumbency in North Goa seats is being captured by this new party called Revolutionary Goans. We did speak about it, and it's led by probably an erstwhile communist, ex-AAP guy, incidentally, Manoj Parab, and it's. I mean, there's a lot of speculations. One of them being it's funded by the church, and who knows what the reality is. But it's getting a lot of traction, especially among the youth, and they have a good social media game, probably the highest followership on Facebook, and the likes more than most parties, the Goan units of parties. Youth is getting attracted towards some of their. I mean, like every revolution, there is attraction, right, for the youth. So that's what Revolutionary Goans seem to be getting. Don't know whether it will translate into seats or maybe more than one seat, but I would say they could end up with 15-20% vote share or even higher in a bunch of constituencies. So I think that's another now way of sort of division of the anti-incumbency vote, which probably will hurt, but definitely it's AAP plus RG as a combo will take away a substantial chunk of vote. But AAP, probably, to your original question, I would say more a 3 to 4 seat thing, not more than that, and that too in seats which BJP would anyways never have won.
Do you think that the revolutionary Goans have a different geographical base or focus as compared to AAP?
I think firstly, pretty much, I think all candidates seem to be Hindus. So far, that's unusual, right? As I told you, any new party which has come on an anti-BJP plank, be it TMC, AAP, has automatically gravitated towards initial Christian leadership, Christian vote bank, and that's. But RG seems to be different in that sense, and pretty much entirely Hindu leadership. At least the facade seems to be that, and so Manoj Parab himself. And again, there is no caste breakup as such. They are just trying to make it caste neutral and just give a overall youth positioning. So some difference in geographic mix for AAP and RG, but I guess uh, if you ask me, if AAP had contested this election immediately after 2013, then AAP would have been that RG. In a sense that what I would give some parallel to 2013 Delhi election, though that AAP did end up winning a lot of seats and all that. But in terms of freshness of faces, they haven't taken anyone from any other political party, no ex-politician, completely new faces. Now, I would love to hear from you. I mean, have you seen any such parallels anywhere else in India? Uh, this new faces, suddenly some revolutionary guys appealing to a certain section, creating a buzz. And the one thing is, unlike other such parties which tend to lose steam as you approach elections, right? RG seems to be holding on or even gaining momentum in certain places. So yeah, that's the one dark horse to watch out for, how it will pan in the final thing.
I think that's an interesting point, right? In the sense that there is clearly a, like, when there is a lack of credibility in the opposition, these kind of movements do come up. And at least in India, I think, and again, completely different scenarios, but an obvious example, of course, is NTK, right, in Tamil Nadu, where, again, on a slightly nativist platform, which seems to be very much a part of RG's platform also, that some sort of nativism, Goa for Goans kind of a thing, something similar to what NTK, that is Seeman's party, does in Tamil Nadu. And if you see the results, well, of course, they didn't come close to winning a seat. They did take a lot of votes, especially in places where the AIDMK BJP alliance really lacked, credibility. Places like the Kaveri Delta, for instance, NTK vote share was pretty significant. Parts of Chennai. So I think that's something like probably. Of course, we'll have to see the results to see where RG makes its maximum impact. Another example, I think, somewhere somewhat similar is Kerala, right, where you have the 2020. Of course, that's completely different from RG in the sense that it's literally a capitalistic party, right? I mean, it's run by a corporate group. It's run by the Kitex group, a corporate group, but the broad principle remains the same, right? In the sense that you want to try and get otherwise apolitical youth and things like that. There are other such, things, other such groups also were there in Kerala. There was another one, I think, in Cochin. There was another couple of ones. So I think, and again, Kerala and Tamil Nadu are relatively more prosperous states. So is Goa. So as you, I think, as we go more and more towards some sort of a polity where Congress faces structural issues in state after state, you'll probably see stuff like this. Like even in Gujarat, I mean, first Hardik Patel came. Of course, he got co-opted by the Congress and sort of seems to have spluttered out. But now AAP is again emerging in the cities of Gujarat. Cities of Gujarat again have been a place where Congress hasn't really existed for many years. So that way, I think nature abhors a vacuum, right? So these kind of situations will lead to innovative players, and of course, it's a question of whether they have staying power or not.
Yeah, agree. I mean, and I don't think any local party. I mean, GFP initially promised, but then it quickly faded. And Vijay Sardesai himself is struggling. But yeah, I guess be interesting to see how much staying power these RG guys have really.
Moving on from RG to the big kid on the new big kid on the block, the TMC. And I mean, if you ask me, the TMC's appearance in Goa is like really random, right? I mean, it first came, it just went right into the places where the BJP was irrelevant, picked up old Christian war horses from the Congress who some reason had not joined the mass exodus of people into the BJP, just took them on and created a whole buzz. And if you ask me, I mean, at that point of time, like this whole thing started, I think, in October, November. That time, AAP was actually generating some good buzz in Goa. These guys came and sort of acted like a buskill for AAP, right? I mean, for some time, everyone was talking about how the TMC will fight the BJP in Goa. And then they got some 2-3 people. Then I think Vijay Sadesai was supposed to join them. He got cold feet or something happened. Mamta Banerjee made some sort of bizarre visit to Goa where nothing really happened. And now it looks like the TMC desperately wants an alliance with the Congress after having said for the last 3-4 months that the Congress is incapable of fighting the BJP. They also wasted a Rajya Sabha seat on Mr. Felleru. I
Okay.
mean, I'm being a bit harsh there, but I think most people in the TMC would agree with my assessment of that. But so, what do you think?
What do you think
Was
is
the
the game
TMC
plan? I mean,
achieving? I don't know. I mean, that's what I was about to ask you. Like, what do you think were they trying to achieve, and where have they reached, and what? Like, are they just trying to cut losses now? What is it?
yeah, I think clearly, I guess, definitely trying to cut losses. And they made a high profile entry, and probably there was some calculation that, again, the Christian vote probably they were focused on, over focused on that. And they thought maybe poaching Falero, Alemão, Alexio, Reginald would sort of help them get that vote, and they will become the other pole quickly. I mean, if they can win 4-5 seats and then others, I mean, that entrance from Congress has continued. I mean, even as of yesterday, a lot of people were joining. But my sense is, barring the seats like Kurtorim, where the Alexo Lorenzo or some other seats, I think they'll very struggle to get maybe more than 3-4%, because one, such a high profile entry, and suddenly there is this outsiders coming in feeling automatically there. So the normal common Goan voter is not going to be enticed by that factor, saying an outsider coming. I mean, it's very easy to spin that narrative, right? It's coming, spending money. Second, what's happened, right? I'm sure huge monies have exchanged hands when a lot of these guys have moved, but that has become a big flashpoint. If you see half the interviews of these politicians who crossed over to TMC, half their interviews go in explaining that they haven't gotten any money. So clearly that's backfiring on all of them. And so I guess it's tough. I would say at most TMC will be in contention in 3-4 seats, maybe win one or two, and maybe not even get double-digit market share in vote share in the rest of the seats. I think that's something which TMC would have realized. They have the whole IPAC machinery doing surveys, I'm sure, every week, and that's where those Mahua Moitra's comments in terms of wanting to ally or offering to ally and saying Congress is not allying seem to be coming from. And on Congress's part, they feel TMC is just a nuisance. They will maybe eat 5-7% vote, and in seats where Congress has a realistic chance, or maybe in with a fight. So I would say Congress is in a way worried about that, and but probably they believe that now that TMC is weakening, and they have followed a policy of not allying or taking anyone who's left the Congress, right? All those defectors, none of them have got Congress tickets. Maybe they want to go to the people with fresh faces and on a plank of we won't take the betrayers. So I feel maybe less than 10% chance of an alliance happening. But yeah, if it does, then it's something for the BJP to worry about. It just unites the opposition, even though their strengths are in similar places and they're not necessarily complementary. But that's what. And in terms of game plan, I mean, Mr. Louison Falero himself is not fighting elections from Navilem, which itself is strange. He should have been leading from the front. And he's not fighting that election. So that itself is, I would say, a bit of a dampener. And a broader game, I don't know what the broader national game is. Because maybe they want to give a perception of a multi-state presence towards creating Mamta Banerjee as a leader opposing Modi and be the main contender for the PM's post from opposition camp. So I don't know what the broader game plan is. I mean, they've been trying to do something in Tripura. They post a bunch of leaders in Assam as well. I think Meghalaya. Yeah, so it's the smaller states that are trying to do that their thing.
Yeah, I think whatever it is, at least as of now, it doesn't look like it's working out for them. And talking of the TMC, of course, we can move to their ally, that is the MGP, which has been their, which has somewhat surprisingly become their allies in Goa. I mean,
Yeah,
when you look at what happened in the last election, right, when the MGP aligned with the Shiv Sena and the Goa Suraksha Manch on a platform that was pretty much, you could say, to the right of the BJP, right?
yeah.
If you look at it from that to now, then generally being in alliance, till of course the BJP is followed 2/3 of their party, to now going to, of all parties, the TMC, which is not just an anti-BJP party, but it's very clearly at an ideological level opposed to BJP in some specific manner and to the larger Hindutva narrative in general, right? So, what do you think this whole thing has been for the MGP? And if you ask me, I mean, I would say, considering how discredited the Congress is, etc., this was a good chance for the MGP in a lot of places to have been the opposition to the BJP, right? Where it could have picked up. I mean, as from an outsider's perspective, if it was not in alliance with the TMC, which I think sort of negates that. So, what do you think has happened with the MGP, and do you think they missed out on something?
I think see MGP itself, as I told the entire, as we discussed, the rise of a party like Revolutionary Goans or even APS, UPMO in some way is again a function of the how discredited the entire opposition itself is, and that's not limited to Congress. I think even MGP is completely discredited. They've done business. Mr. Davlikar was probably the PWD minister for 15 years, from 2000 to 2017, in all Congress government, Parrikar government, Digambar Kamath government. And I think I don't think his credibility is super high beyond his own seat of Madkai. One, I mean, his brother also lost last time. Secondly, MGP itself is probably limited to 7, 8 seats in terms of presence out of 40. And they've been winning 2, 3, 2, 3. I don't think they've won more than 3 seats in the last 15, 20 years in any elections. So their own credibility is not super high. Maybe, as you know, who knows, a lot of money is exchanged hands. I mean, in formation of such a government, no one knows how that's playing out. But I guess, yeah, it's definitely an alliance, strange alliance, and if anything, it hurts MGP in its 7, 8 seats where it is relevant, because those are seats where Hindus are probably dominant, 85%, 90% maybe in many cases. And if I'm sure BJP is going to amp up the narrative that these guys are tied up with TMC, and which probably doesn't work well for that vote bank. So for MGP's own vote bank. So I think that's something which this, and maybe MGP is a party which has lost its utility. It was supposed to be a party of the Bahujan Samaj, and the leadership is completely dominated by two bhats, as they say. It's a complete upper caste party. So I think I'm maybe Sudhin Dhawlikar will win his own seat of Madkai, which is he's nurtured well. Outside of that, maybe one odd seat if they win. But I feel as a party, that's what the cap is. And alliance with TMC could be more a financial benefit one than a politically beneficial ones for them. It's difficult to imagine how it can politically benefit MGP or its candidate. And if you see outside, it's pretty much a Dhawlikar Brothers Incorporation, if you ask me. It is not even a party. So that's what it is. Others come and go, and they remain. So that's what the party is all about.
The thing, what do you think? What are your final? I wouldn't say numbers because we don't even have tickets out, etc. But what do you think is your final view on the end game? Like, how do you think things will look like post 10th March?
I think, it will take a brave man to go with prediction. But I think I'll still go with BJP government, maybe supported by whoever, unattached people or something. I would say I would say given had it been 2012 Congress, then I would say BJP probably would have could ended up in single digits, and the Congress government could have been formed. The current Congress probably is not strong enough, and the other anti-BJP parties are cutting Congress vote itself. So given all this, I would say a 15 to 17 seats for BJP, and maybe they will make up the rest. Probably, I don't know if they get lucky in the elections or post elections, they will manage it. I think that's would be my guess, and single digit seats for Congress. I think the other two more, I would say, dominant. That's the probably the end game I feel in the election. Well, what do you think? I mean,
I sort of agree with you. Like, I think that's broadly where it is. That I don't think the BJP will go below around 15, 16. And obviously, if things go well, I think they do have, after all of this, a reasonable chance at actually crossing 20. And I mean, if that happens, I think it'll be interesting to see how things evolve over the next few years, because that will be pretty shocking considering how things have been over the last 7 years.
yeah,
I mean, I think ever since Mr. Parrikar left, right? I mean,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
been a
yeah.
mess, and the end of it all, the BJP coming out with its own majority government would be a surprising end to it. But I mean, I think there is a floor for the BJP, and it's pretty some sort of a ceiling for the others. So everything would need to go right for everybody else, and everything would need to go wrong for the BJP for something like that to happen. But I mean, if at all that can happen, that's in an anti-incumbency wave, and there is definitely a lot of anti-incumbency. So
Yes, yeah, yeah. I
can't
mean, maybe
really rule
they're
that out.
completely wrong, and Congress sweeps. But I think it's. I mean, I would give it a low probability. I mean, no one wants the Congress ticket. I mean, had that been the case, and there are a lot of claimants for the anti-incumbency vote. So probably, I think that's the what is the floor for the BJP is the ceiling for the Congress. So I think that's how I see. So yeah, you are right. It has to. One thing. I mean, one issue probably. Since I would love to ask you. I mean, what do you think? There's been a lot of noise around Utpal Parrikar's son. He's been such a dominant face for the BJP, and of course, he's not getting the ticket. So, how do you sort of think? I mean, what has been the BJP stance on such instances? You think in such cases across the country in the past?
Has had a It's been a bit. I mean, if you look at it, you can't say it's very consistent, right? I mean, in the sense that if you look at it just as children of leaders, I think you'd probably say it's not consistent. But if you look at it from the way I think the BJP is looking at it, which is winnability, etc., then it is consistent, right? In the sense that the BJP feels if there's nobody else, who's going to be able to win that seat, then they're fine with, like when Gopinath Munde died, they gave his daughter immediately a seat in the bypoll. Then they gave her sister a seat in the assembly, and they've allowed them to sort of continue to
Yeah.
pretty much run the Bede district BJP. So, I mean, there's obviously some sort of uniqueness to Gopinath Munde's appeal, which at least they felt nobody else could sort of take over. But there have been others who've been something similar with Kalyan Singh, right? I mean, his son is an MP, his grandson is an MLA come minister. At the same time, you look at, say, an Anant Kumar, I mean, he died and they immediately sort of, there was no bypoll, right? So directly in the Lok Sabha, there was a lot of expectation his wife would get the seat, and they gave it to somebody else. And I mean, Tejasvi Surya, and of course, he's proven to be a very successful MP from the BJP's point of view. But more importantly, again, Bangalore South is sort of a safe seat, right? I mean, it's not this thing. The other example, I think, is Pramod Mahajan's daughter, Poonam Mahajan, right? I mean, when she entered politics, she was given a pretty tricky seat. I mean, she was asked for first, and then she was given Mumbai North Central, which is again not a easy seat for the BJP. At least no one thought it was going to be a short win in 2014. So I think these kind of things vary from person to person and seat to seat. But one thing I've noticed is that it's easier to get it in a bypoll than in the general election, right? Like just now when Chetan Chauhan died, his wife got the bypoll ticket. She's a sitting MLA.
Yeah, yeah.
But she has been denied the ticket now for the general election. So, so I think there's a complex mix of winnability, etc. And
yeah, I mean, it's the bipolar is
well regarded by the central leadership, but maybe there's something. And
yeah,
of course,
bipolar Utpal didn't get. So I think that was a clear sign that maybe he will never, if he didn't get in bipolar. Yeah. And especially after the the 10 MLAs.
That's the whole thing, right? I mean, the person who won the bipoll, like BJP couldn't even hold the seat in the bipoll, and the person who won the bipoll is now in the BJP. So clearly, there is no reason to say that only Utpal can win the seat.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, it would have been interesting if, given his stature, I mean, he could have probably looked at Madgaon seat. I mean, 15, 16 years back, Digambar Kamath had sort of betrayed Mr. Parrikar and moved over to the Congress. So I guess it could have been an interesting revenge battle. And maybe if and BJP has never won that seat since Mr. Kamath has been dominant. Maybe Utpal could still have lost, but would have been a good chance to give a shot at something, some lateral thinking and go there. I mean, that's another seat with a lot of GSB votes. And Mr. Kamath has had a stranglehold. The BJP unit there is always, infighting. Someone like Utpal moving there and fighting could have given a realistic. And in the end, if it actually ended up winning, it could have been sort of sweet revenge for his late father. So I think something like that could have been interesting. But yeah, Panji doesn't make sense at all. I know there's a lot of social media noise and a section of people make noise, but Babush is just too strong. And imagine for so many years, he's won his wife, or he have won Taligaon, which is like right next to Panjim. And his candidate won the Panjim Municipal Corporation always. So I'm sure there is always some kind of arrangement out there under which Parrikar and he stayed away from each other.
Thanks, Nimish. I think that's about it from our side. So thanks a lot, Nimish, for participating on this podcast. I think there's a lot of interesting content on Goa, and for people who want to get a deep dive into Goa, this should definitely prove helpful. Let's see how our predictions play out on March 10th.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Looking forward to that. Thanks for having me. And Roshan probably in absentia, thanking him as well today.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Bharatvaarta podcast. If you want to see more content like this, then don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We started Bharatvaarta to facilitate long-form discussions on politics, policy, and culture. We don't necessarily endorse anything that was said in this episode. If you wish to offer us feedback, do reach out to us on social media. We are at Bharatvaarta on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You could also get in touch with us on our website www.bharatvaarta.in. The links are in the description below. Until next time, stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.